What is going on, Jason?
Oh, it's a great Sunday. It's about 80 degrees out and feels pretty good.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to having our discussions. Today, we'll be talking about investing, right? What are the current market conditions in the stock market? What are the concerns we're seeing? What solutions that you have in place, and what's the next path forward for our listeners, right? So this is more of an open dialogue where we'll be sharing ideas and hopefully we can add value to others who are listening to enable folks to make better life decisions when it comes
Mhm.
to investing. Now, with my perspective with the stock market, we've seen how it's been just yo-yoing, going up and down, and there's been a lot of, politics involved with the stock market, such as the news with Russia, and where we're seeing the change in the S&P Dow Jones with small caps not so doing well, at least in the start of Q1 and Q2 of this year. Now, what's your takeaway, Jason? Like when it comes to the market conditions, should investors be fearful or should they be taking advantage? I'd love to hear what you have to say with the overall market conditions.
Well, the way I look at it is I kind of go back to that Warren Buffett quote that I think of, like, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when everyone's fearful. And right now is definitely a fearful time. I don't think anybody knows exactly what's going to happen. I think it hasn't been officially noted yet, but I do think we'll probably be in a recession. The market's definitely very sick right now. But with that being said, I would never really recommend anyone to sell, especially if they're basically selling at either a loss or they're selling at less potential than what it could be. Um, and yes, a lot of the small cap companies like iBio and Sky and all of them, they've been really getting hammered in the last several months. But the way my approach to it is I've still kept on buying because, like, iBio right now is sitting around like 31 cents. If I can keep lowering that average down to 31 cents, eventually iBio is probably going to see the light of the day of $1 again. Well, guess what? I have that many more shares. My average is that low, and I would turn around and make off of that. I know there's probably some people out there that are sitting at like a $7 average, but with it at 30 cents right now, it's so much easier for you to lower that average. And even if you just set aside like $50 to $100 a week, that can go a long way over time. Um, in general, like I said, I would keep investing, but what I think a lot of people I've discovered in the last several months make a mistake in is they put all their I know so many financial gurus will tell you so many different things. Like, some of them say, "Oh, you should put all your eggs in one basket, make this one thing work, and do the best at it." That can be fine depending what you're going towards, but I think for the majority of people, that's not a good idea. I think it's best to definitely diversify your assets as much as possible. Um, I know we've talked about it before, like Fundrise, for example. We can go into that. It's basically just a real estate crowdfunding site, and the returns have been phenomenal even during this time with the market being sick. Real estate's still doing very strong in general. So if one thing's suffering, something else will always come through for you. And it definitely helps with the psychological effect of it. I know no matter how much we preach and no matter how much we think about the long term vision, it still doesn't make you feel good when things aren't going the way you want them to. But if you have some things that are doing really well in, and even if some things are not doing so well, it helps balance that out a little bit more. And I'm sure at someday in the future, I don't know when, but I'm sure the real estate market will crash. Stocks may or may not go along with that. Crypto, same thing. Um, and there's so many other avenues to look for in investing too. Art's another one. That Masterworks IO that I showed you a few months ago, that's definitely another one to look into. You can invest in a Picasso painting, for example, and usually the appreciation sits around 10 or 13%. It's a pretty good return. And art generally goes up in value over time. So that's just something else that can be looked out for. And another thing I think a lot of people make a mistake in too is investing in one country, for example, I think is not a good idea. The US, for example, is I think the US is going to go through a time where growth is going to be very slow because to me, from my perspective, I think the US is probably seeing about the best of the best. Sure, there's going to be growth, and on paper, it's going to look like it's better next year, for example, versus like a couple years ago. But I think we're going to start seeing that growth slow down. And then there's a lot of emerging markets around the world too that have higher rates of returns. Now, that can be from various things. It could be from raw materials, it could be oil, it can be stocks in general. I mean, there's stock markets all around the world. It's not just the New York Stock Exchange and that's it. Of course, it requires a lot more steps to be able to get invested in those, especially if you're just an American citizen. But that's something else to look for is foreign investments. That way, if one country's not doing so well, well, maybe this one's doing better in return. Generally speaking, the more investments you have, something's always going to be performing at its best, even if everything else is down. So I think during times like this, it's definitely a good idea to start looking into uh, various investments, diversify as much as possible, and make sure you have a strong foundation for each of those too. Um, Another thing too is like with the combating inflation. Right now is probably not a good time to hold a huge amount of savings. You want to hold some savings, but just enough to basically cover you for like 6 months to a year. Any more than that, probably not a good idea to hold on to. Better to invest those in some way. That way you can have that potential for higher return.
There you have it. So thank you, Jason. I appreciate your thoughts there with the current market conditions, and you've alluded to the potential solutions on these issues with inflation, where the current stock prices are going. Uh, it's interesting how you brought up the Warren Buffett quote, right? I mean, it's taking advantage when there's blood on Wall Street. And the key takeaway I got from that is being able to diversify and diversify, right? That's a key element because to your point, you're taking on more risk when you put all of your eggs into one basket, and not only just looking at the US market, but how do you expand into the other regions? And that's really how you minimize risk over the long-term course. And from how I see it, when it comes to investing, you got to look at it from the long-term perspective. Yeah, we may have got like a haircut recently where we've encountered more risk, but there's opportunity for the hair to grow back and to recover from those gains. So I like how you pointed out, just continue to dollar cost average down with respect to time, and then in the long term course we'll be all right. And when you look at the actual performance of the S&P from left to right, you've seen that just going diagonal, right? So just minimizing the panic and the fear and just taking advantage through diversification.
And I'll say this about stocks too: it's not just small cap companies that have been performing lower than usual. A lot of the big ones, I've even noticed Amazon. I think it's been a couple weeks since I've
Mhm.
checked. They've been kind of sitting below what they usually do too. Um, I'm trying to think what else. I know there's lots of major companies out there, even in the S&P, that have been basically underperforming during this time too. So it's not just like one sector doing bad than the other. It's generally everything's basically underperformed in the last few months.
That's right. And Jason, I know we're getting close to our time here with this video. What would be the next path forward for our listeners here? What do you suggest in terms of considerations? What are your thoughts?
So at least for me, what I'm doing is just continuing to invest aggressively. Like I said, I know a lot of people. on the channel pay attention to iBio. Well, instead of just complaining about the price continuously going down, we've seen time and time again that iBio, they get one day where they go up like 30%. Well, just keep lowering your average all the way down to basically whatever the price is of that day. I mean, 30 cents right now, that's a huge discount. Eventually, I, iBio is going to probably raise up to the dollar mark again. Well, if you can manage to get your average down to below a dollar, you're going to be in extremely good shape, and you're going to have that many more shares to have a strong influence over. And even with the small cap companies, Sky, Heat Biologics, and all of them, they're still putting news out every now and then, especially when they do their quarterly reports. They're still continuing to work towards their vision and their products. So none of the, and of course, we don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but the CEOs of these companies don't seem to be waning from what they're doing, and no sign of slowing down. So I believe that eventually they will have their time, and during this time, we just continue to continue to invest aggressively until that day comes.
All right, Jason. Well, thank you for your thoughts there, sharing with the audience here. And to your point, what goes down will eventually go back up and have its time to shine like a chandelier.
And I'll say this too about iBio. They have what advantage they have that a lot of companies don't is they have a huge cash reserve. They basically keep enough cash on hand where they can go on 2 years operating with what they have at that current moment. And you see comments every now and then where they say, "Oh, they're going to go bankrupt" and all this. There's really no sign of that, I think, for the time being.
Okay, Jason. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I look forward to putting out more content with you. So I
Yeah, of
appreciate your time and thank you.
course, thanks.